said that a month ago, even though he wouldn't say it today. So that's a story from Business Insider, but also asked unanimous consent to enter into the record. A June 12th story, Dr. Fauci tells ABC Powerhouse Politics that attending rallies, protest is risky, even though today his position seems to have changed. Obviously, his position's changed on many things, many times over the last several months. But I'd ask to enter those two articles for the record.
I'll yield to Dr. Fauci.
Like I said, any crowd, whether it's a protest, but any crowd in which you have people close together without masks is a risk. And I'll stick by that statement. It's a public health statement. It's not a judgment on why you're there in the crowd. It's a statement related to the fact that you're in a crowd.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't ask him a question, and you let him respond. I was making unanimous consent.
So, and I'm going to run this meeting.
Well, but I would like a chance to respond to what
remember,
you said.
I'm going to chair this meeting.
No, I understand you're the chair. That's why I said, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, your statements, whatever you got there, will be entered into the record. And without objection, in a gathering, whether you're protesting or whether you're politicking, in a gathering would be risky. And that's what the man has said.
Yeah, but that's not what's happening. That's my point.
Oh, all of the
that is not what's happening. There are limits. People can't go to church, can't go to work,
Chairman,
can't go
that
to
gentleman's
school.
out of order.
But they can protest all they want.
That goes for the Democrats and Republicans. I'll make the decision as to who is out of order. I'm going to be as gentlemanly as you will allow me to be.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. And with that, I'll yield 5 minutes to Mr. Green.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and witnesses for your amazing service to our country. Thank you. First, Dr. Fauci, there was a bit of an uproar about a picture of you at the Nationals game without your mask on. I think you were seated with your wife. You had a close friend there with no one else nearby you. And that gentleman who was with you had his mask on. I think you have said in the press since that you took it off to take a drink of water. I just want to point out, according to an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I quote, significant exposure to COVID-19 means face-to-face contact within 6 feet with a patient with symptomatic COVID-19 that is sustained for at least a few minutes, and some say more than 10 minutes or even 30 minutes. The chance of catching COVID-19 from a passing interaction in a public space is therefore minimal, end quote. The science seems to be pretty clear. We should absolutely wear masks when we're in close contact with those outside of our household. I think that was just the conclusion of that discussion. It's not a crime to pull your mask off, to take a drink of water in 100-degree temperature when you're seated next to your wife and someone else is there. I guess I make the point to show how the media has created all of this hype, which has led some officials across the country making decisions that are not based on science. And there are real consequences to those. I mean, if people are hot, they shouldn't get heat stroke and not take their mask off. So I'd like to move on to some other troubling actions that were done this week. This week, the chairman of the committee sent 4 letters, all to Republican governors in red states, demanding extensive documents related to coronavirus response. The White House Coronavirus Task Force report has 21 states listed in the so-called red zone. This isn't about transparency. It's about ridiculing 4 states, including my home state of Tennessee, and it distorts the truth. The letter singled out 4 GOP states, but what about the other 17 states? Why didn't California get included in the letter? They've seen an explosion in positive cases. They're in the spike. They're in the 21 listed red zone states, targeting only Republican governors when clearly 17 other states, many of whom are Democrat, are also experiencing the spikes and in the red zone, shows this effort has nothing to do with getting answers and is, as the chairman has said in his opening comments, politics over science. No scientist who wants the truth samples just Republicans. Honestly, it's a laughable partisan strike. It also compounds the insult to all Americans for the failure of this committee to look at the real culprit. As I said in previous testimony, a Columbia University study showed that 66% of American deaths could have been prevented if China had spoken up 1 week earlier. That's thousands of American lives that could have been saved. So instead of addressing the cause of 66% of our casualties, the Select Committee on the Coronavirus picks on American businesses, the Trump administration, and now 4 state governors, all Republican, when we know other blue states are in the exact same situation. This is the definition of partisanship, but I can hear it now. Didn't the right send a letter to certain governors? And yes, we did. We sent it to every single governor who refused to follow the Trump plan, emphasis on plan, and sent COVID-positive patients back to nursing homes, killing patients. We didn't select just a few of those. I applaud Congressman Foster, who approached me as a physician and asked me to join a bipartisan partnering with the administration to assist in the execution of Operation Warp Speed plan. That's how we should be functioning. That kind of bipartisan action. Finally, on a positive note, I wanted to mention the Swedish study and then ask Dr. Fauci some questions about that, because I think it really illuminates some of the exciting findings in science. T cells are a type of white blood cell. They regulate immune response. The Swedish study found that many people with mild asymptomatic COVID demonstrate so-called T cell immunity to the coronavirus. The study further found that twice as many who tested positive for antibodies had T cell immunity. So we know there are tons of people out there with immunity that we aren't testing. And I'd love for you, sir, if you could comment, educate America, educate all of us a little bit on T-cell immunity and what the ramifications are to the plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll very quickly try to answer that. So there are 2 limbs of the immune response. One is an antibody, which is a protein that is made by the cells of the body to bind to the virus and is usually the hallmark of protection against infection. There's another limb of the immune response called the cellular immune response of T cells. And those T cells have the capability of essentially suppressing or killing cells that are infected and preventing the cells that are infected from making new viruses. So there are 2 parts of it. Even though one is generally felt to be protecting against the initial infection, the other is an important complementary. And you're right, the Swedes came out with a paper, and also a paper from NIH grantees from La Jolla just came out in the journal Cell, showing the same thing, that in individuals who were infected and recovered, they had T-cell responses, but importantly, there was T-cell reactivity also detected in non-exposed individuals, which means that maybe there's some memory from other coronaviruses that are benign cold viruses that you were exposed to that might, and I say might, explain why some people, even children, might be protected, that they had exposure that's not measured in antibody, but measured by T cells. This is work that we really need to pursue. We're just at the cusp of understanding the importance of this type of response in COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired, and as I yield to Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes, may I address the letter, which I have responded to. You have an answer from me. You have not seen the answer? Just be sure, since you put the letter on the record here, let me put my response on the record. My response had to do with the 4 states that have refused to comply with the critical recommendations from the task force. And all 4 have governors who have publicly stated that they do not plan to comply. In contrast to that, we did not send a letter to those states that did indicate that they will comply with the task force. And that's 3 of those states had Republican governors, and they did not get a letter from us. So this has nothing to do with partisanship, but with political response rather than responding to the science, and I respond to it. With that, I yield to Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing on the urgent need for a national plan. A stack of paper is not a plan. A large and unwieldy stack of paper is not a plan. A plan is a comprehensive and coordinated strategy for victory, and we haven't seen anything like a plan. No one has shown us anything. Blaming other countries is not a plan. Blaming China is not a plan. Blaming China is not even a good excuse for the lethal incompetence and disinformation of President Trump. China's early cover-up of the disease only deepens the responsibility and complicity of President Trump, who on 37 different occasions, as I've demonstrated by submissions to this committee, defended and excused and praised the Chinese government and President Xi. A plan is a plan, and we haven't heard what the plan is, and this is what has bedeviled us from the beginning. Mr. Chairman, we've got 4.4 million cases. We lead the world in case count. We lead the world in death count. More than 153,000 Americans are dead right now. 54 million people filed for unemployment benefits. We've seen a 1/3 drop in GDP, a 1/3 drop, unprecedented in economic activity. The chart behind me demonstrates the astonishing and terrifying growth of this disease. It took us 98 days to reach 1 million cases. It took us 44 days to reach 2 million cases. It took 26 days to reach 3 million cases, and it took us only 15 days to reach 4 million cases. Director Redfield, when do you estimate we're going to get to 5 million cases? What's next?
Thank you, Congressman. I think one thing I've learned about this virus is it's not predictable. I will say one thing that's important, that what happens next is really dependent upon if the American public fully embrace what we've asked. If they fully embrace those 5 steps, we'll get control of this pandemic.
Well, I thank you for that, and I thank both you and Dr. Fauci for restating the absolute imperative importance of everybody wearing their masks when they're out in public, and everybody maintaining social distance and following the other public health protocols. But the public health officials have been subjected to harassment, and we've even seen some today, have been subjected to ridicule and have been subjected to ludicrous, absurd contradiction. So I want to go through some of the propaganda and disinformation quickly, just as a public service announcement, because America is watching you. And Dr. Fauci, why don't I start with you? Are children almost immune to the disease? Just yes or no, because I've got a lot to get through, please. Are children almost immune to the disease?
We have to be a little more precise. You mean almost immune? Do children get infected? Yes, they do.
Have hundreds of thousands of children been infected? Hundreds of thousands of children infected. So children are not almost immune to the disease. Is COVID-19 going to magically disappear, Dr. Fauci?
I do not believe it would disappear because it's such a highly transmissible virus. It is unlikely that it's going to disappear.
Does wearing a mask give people COVID-19?
Does wearing a mask give it? No.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge.
All right. Is COVID-19 a hoax?
No.
Should people take hydroxychloroquine as a cure for COVID-19?
The overwhelming cumulative evidence of properly conducted randomized controlled trials indicate no therapeutic efficacy for hydroxychloroquine.
Can people cure themselves of COVID-19 by injecting themselves with disinfectant or bleach? I'm sorry?
No.
Are you safe from the disease if you go to one of the aforementioned large assemblies, crowds, demonstrations, without a mask on and not observing social distancing, if you sign a waiver that you won't sue the sponsor of the event?
I'm not so sure those things are connected, but I'll repeat what I've said multiple times, that being in a crowd, particularly without a mask, is a risk for acquisition and transmission.
Okay, but signing a waiver doesn't confer any kind of immunity on you from being infected by the disease?
No, of course not.
All right. Dr. Fauci, the European governments are in a completely different place. They've got the disease on the run. In fact, the Asian countries have the disease on the run. I saw some remarkable figures. Almost every other country on earth is doing far, far better than the United States, except for Brazil, whose president has followed President Trump's policies. But we have 153,000 dead. Canada, our next door neighbor, has less than 9,000. We have 17 times the number of deaths from it. China which of course is much larger than the United States, has lost 4,661 people. We've lost 153,000 people. Our rate of death is 36 times higher than China, and on and on. Do we have the financial resources and the scientific expertise in America to do what other governments have done to bring the infection rate down to something manageable so the end is in sight of this nightmare?
I believe we do have the tools, and certainly there's been a considerable degree of financial investment.
So what is the difference? Why are all of the other countries defeating the disease and we're not? Why do we not have a plan, a strategy for victory to win, to beat COVID-19?
Well, I believe I addressed that in not only my opening statement, but also in response to the question of the congressman. And that is that when you look at the comparison between Asia and Europe, as is shown by the chairman's poster up there, that when they shut down to the tune of about 95%, getting their baseline down to tens or hundreds of cases per day. So, when we did it, we got it down, but unfortunately, our baseline was 20,000 a day.
All right, so we're getting somewhere, but would you agree with me that the critical difference is either the presence or the absence of social cohesion and political leadership to actually develop a plan, execute it, and stick to it?
I think there was such a diversity of response in this country from different states that we really did not have a unified bringing everything down.
Yes.
The gentleman's time has expired, but Dr. Fauci, if you'd like to add more to his question.
No, I think I just answered the question.
But, I mean, the end of it was essentially, do we need to stop these disgraceful attacks on public health officials?
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Kim for 5 minutes.
Right, thank you. Thank you to the witnesses for coming out here today. I appreciate it. I wanted to just start with a quick question to the three of you, of yes, no, if you're able to. It's a question that comes from a constituent of mine, and the constituent asked me, and I wanted to ask you, and I'll start with you, Dr. Redfield. Would you assess that our federal government, the CDC included, is doing everything possible to respond to the coronavirus crisis? Dr. Redfield.
I think we do have a comprehensive response. The one comment I want to make is the complexity is, as I mentioned before, for over 5 decades, we've underinvested in the core capabilities of public health. And hopefully we've seen now the consequence of that. So as I said,
with our capabilities right now, would you assess that the federal government is doing everything possible?
Within the capabilities that we do have, but recognizing the core capabilities have not been invested in effectively over the last 5 decades.
Okay. Admiral, same question to you. Is our federal government doing everything possible to respond to the coronavirus crisis?
It's a very broad question. I do agree with Dr. Redfield. I think within the capabilities we have, we are doing that.
Dr. Fauci, do you agree with your colleagues here? Is within the capabilities of the federal government, are you doing everything possible to respond to the crisis?
Right, I can only speak very cogently about the agency that I'm responsible for, and I can tell you absolutely that the National Institutes of Health is really doing everything they possibly can, and it's really an all-hands-on-deck approach, not only for the institute that I direct, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, but the director of NIH himself is spending most of his time right now on this, even though he's responsible for a lot of other institutes. So I think we are doing about as much as we possibly can.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Fauci. Admiral, I wanted to turn back to you. I just got a text message from a constituent today that follows up on this type of question. And she, Laura, says, I got a COVID test 10 days ago at a drive-up testing site and still do not have the results. And I know you mentioned before that 76% of tests are coming back within 5 days, but that also means that about a quarter of tests in this country are taking more than 5 days to be able to get these results back. So I wanted to ask you, would it be possible for our nation to have results for all COVID tests completed and returned within 48 and 72 hours? Is that a possible benchmark that we can achieve?
It is not a possible benchmark we can achieve today, given the demand and the supply. It is absolutely a benchmark we can achieve moving forward.
Now, I guess a question. So, as you said, the demand and the supply. Now, the demand is something that you don't have an ability to control. But in terms of the supply, when I ask you that question, are we doing everything possible to be able to address the needs of the coronavirus crisis. What would you say to Laura here? Is the federal government doing everything that they can possibly to be able to try to get that testing timeline down to 48 to 72 hours?
I do believe we are. As we've talked about just the raw numbers of things, but we're investing in a number of technologies that will greatly expand point-of-care testing, and I think that's the future, to move more and more to point-of-care testing. We're doing that with existing technologies, with new EUAs. Dr. Fauci talked about the NIH's efforts, and I think there'll be a lot of announcements from them this morning as well. So that's where we're pointing, because point of care gives you a result in.
Well, I was really interested in what you said, earlier in this hearing, which was about, trying to get point of care testing to nursing homes and long-term care facilities. I agree with that greatly. And that feels like it's a place where the federal government is stepping up with additional resources. I'm guessing because the states have been unable to be able to fulfill something of that nature. Is that correct?
We always wanted to do that, but we did not have the physical technologies that were available. With the recent approval of a second point of care instrument and the manufacturing, we were able to do that. We were not, and it's literally as soon as that happened, we put that into gear. And I just wanted to correct.
What interests me about that is that this is a situation, again, where when it comes to tests, I keep hearing that, this is state's responsibility to kind of take the lead on this. But with the long-term care, it seems like this is a place where the federal government is stepping in and trying to surge resources to be able to.
So this has always been a collaborative relationship, right? So the federal government buys all the swabs and tubes of media. We deliver that to the states. We buy 40% of Abbott ID Nows, deliver those to the states. We make affirmative actions for nursing homes because that's where 40 to 50% is. And everything else is really a collaborative interaction. There's part state, there's part federal. We really do work together on that. We do not defer everything to the state. If we did, I wouldn't be spending 24/7 with a team of 50 people since March 12th.
Great. Thank you so much. My time has expired. Yield back.
Thank you. Without objection, I would like to place two reports into the record. One is from Forbes, and it's entitled, "Researchers say protests did not increase COVID-19 spread, but Republicans are still blaming them." This is one report. And I have in my hand here, I have a report and a study from the National Bureau of Economics Research that was published last month. And this study found that there was no connection between Black Lives Matter and protests in recent months and increased spread of the coronavirus. So without objection, I would like to place both of these studies into the record. We will now go to a second round of questioning. I'd like to ask the panelists, would you like a 5-minute break before we begin the next line of questioning? Yeah, okay, so we are taking a 5-minute break, and we will be back in 5 minutes for more questioning. Thank you.